You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Lebanon found itself deeply divided, with the south and western parts of Beirut turning into strongholds for the Palestine Liberation Organization and various Muslim militias. Meanwhile, the Christians took control over East Beirut and their area of Mount Lebanon. The city of Beirut was bisected by what became known as the Green Line, marking the division between these opposing sides. In 1976, leaders from the Maronite community, specifically the National Liberal Party, the Kataeb Party, and the Lebanese Renewal Party, came together to form the Lebanese Front. This was essentially a political answer to the Lebanese national movement. They had their own militias, the Tigers, Kataeb Regulatory Forces, and Guardians of the Cedars, which all teamed up under a group called the Lebanese Forces. This group acted as the military arm of the Lebanese Front. The Kataeb Party, led by Bashir Gemayel, quickly emerged as the force to reckon with within the Lebanese forces. Between 1977 and 1980, under Gemayel's push, the Lebanese forces grew more powerful, either by merging with or eliminating smaller groups, establishing themselves as the main Maronite military entity. In a tragic turn of events, in March of the same year, Kamal Jumblat, the leader of the Lebanese National Movement and the Progressive Socialist Party, was killed. His assassination was widely attributed to the Syrian government. Despite the potential for turmoil, his son, Walid Jumblat, stepped into his leadership role with unexpected ease. However, the Lebanese national movement began to crumble after Kamal Jumblat's death. The coalition, originally made up of leftists, Shia, Sunni, Palestinians and Druze, struggled to maintain unity due to their differing interests. Hafez al-Assad of Syria seized this moment of vulnerability to further divide both the Maronite Christian and Muslim coalitions, adopting a strategy of divide and conquer. The 100 Days War was essentially a conflict within the larger Lebanese Civil War, unfolding in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, from February to April 1978. During this intense period, one political figure stood his ground in East Beirut's Achrafiyeh neighborhood, President Kamil Shamoun, who determinedly remained in place. The battle lines were drawn between Maronite forces and Syrian troops that were part of the Arab deterrent force. For a relentless 100 days, Syrian forces bombarded the Christian-dominated area of Achrafiyeh in Beirut. This fierce fighting eventually led to the Syrian army being driven out of East Beirut, marking a halt to the Arab deterrent forces' operations in Lebanon. This clash not only showcased the Syrians' real motives in Lebanon, but also resulted in severe casualties, with 160 people losing their lives and another 400 wounded. In 1977 and 1978, the tension between Israel and its neighbor Lebanon reached a boiling point due to the actions of the Palestine Liberation Organization. These tensions culminated on March 11, 1978, when a group of 11 fighters from the Fatah faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization made their way onto a beach in northern Israel. This group went on to hijack 2 buses filled with passengers on the road between Haifa and Tel Aviv. In a violent spree, they also fired at cars passing by in an event that came to be known as the Coastal Road Massacre. This attack resulted in the tragic loss of 37 lives, with 76 others wounded, before the attackers were stopped by Israeli forces in a shootout. In response to this, Israel launched an invasion into Lebanon just 4 days after the massacre, in a military operation dubbed Operation Litani. The Israeli army quickly took control of a significant portion of southern Lebanon, reaching areas south of the Litani River. In the wake of these events, the United Nations Security Council stepped in by passing Resolution 425. This resolution demanded an immediate withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon and established the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon's goal was to try and bring about a peaceful resolution to the conflict. In 1978, Israeli forces left the area but maintained control over a security zone along the southern border, approximately 12 miles wide. This area was defended by the South Lebanon Army, a group composed mostly of Christian and Shia fighters led by Major Saad Haddad and supported by Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Menachem Begin from the Likud party, drew a comparison between the struggles of the Christian minority in southern Lebanon, which constituted about 5% of the population in the areas controlled by the South Lebanon Army, and the experiences of European Jews during World War II. Despite a ceasefire, the Palestine Liberation Organization continued to launch over 270 attacks against Israel. These attacks led to people in Galilee frequently having to evacuate their homes. Evidence found at the Palestine Liberation Organization's headquarters after an invasion proved these attacks originated from Lebanon. Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, did not denounce these actions, arguing the ceasefire didn't apply outside Lebanon. From June to August 1979, the Israeli Defense Forces stepped up their artillery and airstrikes in southern Lebanon, causing the death of around 40 people and leading to a significant number of civilians fleeing the area. On June 27, 1979, 4 Syrian planes were shot down over southern Lebanon, with 1 aircraft reportedly taken down by Palestinian ground forces. In April 1980, an incident involving United Nations peacekeepers occurred in the buffer zone at At-Tiri, highlighting the ongoing tensions and the complex situation on the ground. In the first half of 1981, Lebanon experienced some of the worst violence since the mid-70s. In the southern part of the country, tensions escalated between the rebel militia, led by Major Sa'ad Haddad, and the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, referred to as UNIFIL. This escalation came after Lebanese President Elias Sarkis and United Nations officials agreed in Damascus on deploying Lebanese troops to areas patrolled by UNIFIL, an arrangement that Major Haddad did not accept. On March 16th, an attack by Haddad's forces resulted in the deaths of 3 UNIFIL soldiers from Nigeria. The situation was further complicated by political developments in Israel, where elections were coming up in June. Prime Minister Menachem Begin, facing the prospect of defeat, confirmed Israel's support for the Phalange militia, led by Bashir Gemayel, and stated that Israel would step in if Syrian forces attacked them. Israel's defense minister, Raphael Eitan, made several visits to Junye, a key area in Lebanon, and Israeli forces conducted airstrikes in southern Lebanon and carried out raids against the Palestine Liberation Organization, abbreviated as PLO. Meanwhile, in Beirut, the division known as the Green Line, separating the eastern and western parts of the city, saw intensified sniper and artillery confrontations peaking in April. The major players in these conflicts included the Lebanese army and Syrian forces. In the Christian town of Zahle, located at the western edge of the Bekaa Valley, the Phalangist militia was strengthening its position, adding artillery to their outposts and building a new road to their stronghold. Early in April, fighting intensified around Zahle, leading to a siege by the Syrian army, with neighboring Baalbek also experiencing violence. In a tragic event on April 19th, Haddad's militia shelled Sidon, resulting in the death of 16 civilians. It was reported that this attack was made at the request of Bashir Gemayel, aiming to alleviate Syrian pressure on Zahle. The situation escalated when, on April 27th, Syrian forces attacked the Phalangists' mountain positions, and the following day Israeli forces shot down 2 Syrian helicopters near Zahle. Despite Israeli intervention, the Syrians managed to seize control of the strategic mountain road and tighten their siege. The conflict drew in Israel more directly when Syrian anti-aircraft missiles were introduced into the Bekaa Valley, leading Israel to attack a missile site in late May, killing 4 technicians and 2 Syrian soldiers. This move was apparently made with prior notification to the United States. By early July, the siege of Zahle by Syrian forces came to an end, diminishing the Phalangists' power but not their alliance with Israel. A plan to deploy government troops in the south was shelved. A significant escalation occurred on July 17th when Israeli planes bombed buildings in Beirut housing PLO offices, leading to a claim before the United Nations Security Council of 300 civilian deaths and 800 injuries. This bombing drew global condemnation and resulted in a temporary stop of U.S. aircraft exports to Israel. In August, Ariel Sharon, then the defense minister of Israel, started planning an offensive against the PLO's military presence in West Beirut, targeting the group's headquarters and bunkers, culminating in further escalation of the conflict. Let's talk about a series of significant events that unfolded in the early 80s involving Israel, Lebanon, and various groups, in a way that's a bit easier to digest. On June 3, 1982, a group called the Abu Nidal organization, which had broken off from Fatah, attempted to assassinate the Israeli ambassador Shlomo Argov in London. This led Israel to launch airstrikes against Palestine Liberation Organization and Popular Front for the liberation of Palestine targets in West Beirut, resulting in over 100 deaths. The Palestine Liberation Organization retaliated with rockets and artillery from Lebanon, breaking the existing ceasefire. In the midst of this, the United Nations Security Council stepped in on June 5th, unanimously passing Resolution 508. This resolution called for an immediate halt to all military actions in and around Lebanon by June 6, 1982. Now moving over to Israel's strategy, on June 6, 1982, Israel kicked off Operation Peace for Galilee, aiming at Palestine Liberation Organization bases in Lebanon. Israeli forces pushed 25 miles into Lebanon right up to East Beirut, supported quietly by Christian Maronite leaders and militias. The Israeli cabinet had initially planned to move 40 kilometers into Lebanon to destroy Palestine Liberation Organization bases and create a buffer zone to protect northern Israel from Palestine Liberation Organization rocket attacks. Nonetheless, Israeli military leaders had already set their sights on Beirut, following a plan from the previous year. The United Nations wasn't silent during this. They passed another resolution on June 6th, demanding Israel pull back to the recognized borders of Lebanon, but the US blocked a later proposal on June 8th, which demanded Israel's withdrawal. By June 15th, Israeli forces were stationed just outside Beirut. In response to calls from the United States for a Palestine Liberation Organization retreat, Israeli Defense Minister Ariel Sharon ordered bombings in West Beirut, where around 16,000 Palestine Liberation Organization fighters had fortified their positions. Despite this military debacle, Palestine Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat managed to negotiate a significant political outcome, especially after a multinational force came to oversee the Palestine Liberation Organization's evacuation. Regarding ceasefire efforts, the United Nations Security Council proposed on June 26th a resolution for an immediate Israeli pullback from around Beirut as a step toward a full withdrawal from Lebanon, and for the Palestine Liberation Organization to move back to their camps. The US, however, vetoed this because it seemed like an attempt to keep the Palestine Liberation Organization politically alive. Nevertheless, after an urgent appeal from President Reagan, Prime Minister Begin of Israel agreed to stop the attacks. The violence and civilian suffering escalated until Philip Habib brokered a ceasefire on August 12th, following an intense Israeli bombardment of West Beirut. This agreement paved the way for the withdrawal of Israeli and Palestine Liberation Organization forces and the introduction of a multinational force consisting of US Marines and French and Italian units. This force was tasked with facilitating the Palestine Liberation Organization's departure and safeguarding civilians. On August 21, 1982, the first members of an international force touched down in Beirut. Their mission? To ensure the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, left Lebanon peacefully. This move came about thanks to the United States stepping in to negotiate. They managed to get Syrian soldiers and PLO fighters to agree to leave Beirut. This agreement led to troops from the US, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom coming together to form this multinational force. However, there was a hitch in the plan. Israel claimed that around 2,000 PLO fighters were still hiding out in Palestinian refugee camps on the edges of Beirut. Just a couple of days later, on August 23rd, Bashir Gemayel was elected as the president of Lebanon. Sadly, his time in office was cut short. On September 14th, he was assassinated by Habib Tanyus Shartouni, who was connected to the Syrian Social Nationalist Party. Between September 16th and 18th in 1982, a tragic event unfolded in Beirut, Lebanon, in the Shatila refugee camp and the nearby Sabra neighborhood. Lebanese Phalangist militias, working alongside the Israeli Defense Force, carried out a massacre, killing an estimated number of civilians that ranges between 460 and 3,500. These victims were primarily Lebanese and Palestinian Shiites. The Israeli military had initially instructed their Phalangist allies to target fighters from the Palestine Liberation Organization within these neighborhoods. However, what ensued was a brutal slaughter of civilians by soldiers loyal to the Phalangist leader, Eli Hobeika. Making the situation even more dire, Israeli forces encircled the area, trapping the civilians by blocking exits, and even used flares to illuminate the massacre scene for the Phalangists during the night. Despite being aware of the carnage, Israeli Defense Force officials did not intervene to stop it. In response to the international outcry that followed, the Israeli government, 10 days after the massacre, formed an investigative body known as the Kahan Commission. By 1983, the commission had concluded its investigation, finding Ariel Sharon, the then Defense Minister of Israel, personally responsible for allowing the massacre to happen. The commission's recommendation was that Sharon should resign from his post. Facing significant pressure, Sharon stepped down as defense minister, but remained in the government, taking up a position as a minister without a specific portfolio. On May 17, 1983, an important agreement was signed by Lebanon's leader Amin Gemayel Israel and the United States. This deal was about Israel pulling out its troops from Lebanon, but with a catch. It would only happen if Syrian soldiers also left. It's been said that the US and Israel really pushed Gemayel into this deal. The agreement clearly stated that Lebanon and Israel were no longer at war with each other. Essentially, it was like a peace deal with Israel, but many Lebanese Muslims thought it was a way for Israel to keep a strong grip on southern Lebanon. People talked about the May 17th agreement a lot, especially in the Arab world, where many saw it as Lebanon being forced to give in. Amin Gemayel, Lebanon's president at the time, faced a lot of criticism and was even called a traitor by some. The situation in Lebanon got a lot tenser after this agreement. Syria, being totally against the deal, refused to even talk about pulling out its troops. This refusal by Syria meant that no further steps could be taken following the agreement. Back in August 1983, Israel pulled its troops out of the Chuf district, an area located just southeast of Beirut. This move eliminated the buffer that had been keeping the Druze and the Maronite militias from clashing, leading to a resurgence of intense fighting known as the Mountain War. Israel chose not to step in during this conflict. By the time September rolled around, the Druze had managed to take over much of the Chuf region, with Israeli forces withdrawing from almost everywhere, except a southern security area they continued to hold. In the same month, as battles raged on between the Lebanese army and various opposing groups during the Mountain War, the Reagan administration over in the White House decided it was time to take action. They gave the green light for naval gunfire to be used in taking down Druze and Syrian positions. The main aim here was to offer support and protection to the Lebanese army, which was finding itself in a pretty tough spot. Back in 1982, Iran set up a base in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, under Syrian control. Here, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC for short, created, funded, trained, and supplied Hezbollah, making it act like Iran's own proxy army. The IRGC pulled together members from Shiite communities who were pushing back against Israel's occupation, including people from the main Shiite group, Nabi Berri's Amal movement. Hezbollah took its revolutionary Islamic inspiration from the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Thanks to Iran's backing and a large group of Shiite refugees who supported their cause, Hezbollah quickly became a powerful armed force. When it comes to attacks against Americans and Europeans in Lebanon, a series of violent events unfolded. On April 18, 1983, a suicide bomber hit the U.S. Embassy in West Beirut, killing 63 people. This was the start of multiple attacks targeting U.S. and Western interests in Lebanon. A particularly harsh attack happened on October 23, 1983, when an Iranian-sponsored suicide bomber struck the barracks housing U.S. and French forces in Beirut, killing 241 American and 58 French servicemen. On January 18, 1984, the president of the American University of Beirut, Malcolm H. Kerr, was assassinated. Even after U.S. forces left Lebanon, attacks like the September 20, 1984, bombing of the U.S. Embassy Annex in East Beirut continued, taking 24 lives, including 2 U.S. servicemen. A significant incident on July 1, 1985, followed the hijacking of a TWA plane that ended up at Beirut Airport. After this, President Reagan prohibited all flights to and from Lebanon, a ban that wasn't lifted for 12 years. On the 6th of February, there was a significant conflict in West Beirut, commonly referred to as the February 6th Intifada. During this clash, the Amal movement and other groups from West Beirut achieved a decisive victory over the Lebanese army. The conflict began to turn when numerous Muslim and Druze soldiers chose to leave the army and join the militia forces, severely weakening the government's military and leading to its near collapse. In the aftermath of the uprising, the situation for the United States Marines stationed in Lebanon became increasingly difficult, making their continued presence there unsustainable. With Syrian forces and Muslim groups gaining more control and exerting more pressure, the situation became critical, As a result, on March 5, 1984, the Lebanese government made the decision to cancel the 17th of May agreement, a move that paved the way for the United States Marines to leave Lebanon just a few weeks later. Between 1985 and 1989, the already tense situation in Lebanon deteriorated further as efforts to bring about national peace failed. This period witnessed severe conflict, notably during the War of the Camps in 1985 to 86, where the Amal militia with Syrian support aimed to eliminate the Palestine Liberation Organization from its strongholds in Lebanon. The clashes resulted in numerous Palestinian casualties and significant destruction to the Sabra and Shatila and Bourj el Barajneh refugee camps. On March 8, 1985, a car bomb in Bir al-Abid, South Beirut, caused the death of 80 people and injured over 400. Later, on August 8, 1985, a meeting in Damascus featured key Lebanese and Syrian leaders, including President Amin Gemayel, Prime Minister Rashid Karami, and Syrian President Hafez Assad, trying to stop the clashes between Christian and Druze militias. Following this, a series of car bombs in Beirut seemed intended to sabotage any peace efforts. Significant bombings included one on August 14th in a Christian area and another on August 17th near a supermarket, both in areas controlled by the Lebanese forces, killing 55 people. More bombings followed, targeting different district areas and even Tripoli, claimed by a mysterious group called the Black Brigades. The violence intensified, with artillery fire claiming 300 lives within 2 weeks. In Tripoli, fights between Alawite and Sunni militias forced 200,000 to flee, leaving 500 dead after Syrian troops intervened. By the end of December 1985, Syrians and their Lebanese allies attempted to stabilize Lebanon, a move opposed by President Gemayel and the Falangist Party. In a significant turn of events, the pro-Syrian head of the Lebanese forces, Elie Hobeika, was removed from power in January 1986. Days later, a car bomb in East Beirut killed 20, with subsequent bombings targeting Falangist sites. In April 1986, after American airstrikes on Libya, 3 Western hostages were killed, setting off a new wave of hostage-taking. The next year, hostilities in Beirut surged as Palestinians, leftists, and Druze forces banded against Amal, prompting more Syrian intervention. On February 22, 1987, Syrian troops entered Beirut to mediate conflicts, and in one tragic incident, 27 people were killed in a Shia district. Their funerals were attended by thousands, raising cries for vengeance, although Ayatollah Khomeini later issued a decree against attacking Syrian forces. Back in 1988, the tension between Amal and Hezbollah escalated into violent clashes in Shiite areas. In early May of that year, Hezbollah launched a significant attack against Amal in the Dahieh suburbs of southern Beirut. By May 11th, they had taken control of 80% of this area, marking their emergence as a formidable force in the capital city for the first time. On January 2, 1989, the conflict reignited in the Iqlim al-Tufa region of southern Lebanon, although this time the fighting didn't lead to any major changes in territory. The situation flared up again in December 1989 in Iqlim al-Tufa, where over 3,500 fighters from Amal and their Palestinian allies found themselves battling against 2,000 Hezbollah militants. This round of fighting gradually quieted down by December 28th. Although there were a few minor skirmishes in 1990, the hostilities had essentially ceased by November of that year, bringing a pause to the conflict. Prime Minister Rashid Karami, leading a unity government created after unsuccessful peace attempts in 1984, was tragically killed on June 1, 1987. Suspicions fell on Samir Geagea, working with the Lebanese army for the assassination, though proof remained elusive. With President Gemayel's term ending in September 1988, he controversially nominated Michel Aoun, a fellow Maronite Christian and then head of the Lebanese Armed Forces, as acting prime minister, going against the established National Pact. This era saw tensions rise further with Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, actively seeking arenas to counter Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. To diminish Iran's sway via groups like Amal and Hezbollah, Iraq supported Maronite factions, aiding both Aoun and Geagea's Lebanese forces from 1988 to 1990. The breach of the National Pact led Muslim factions to rally behind Salim al-Hos, a Sunni who followed Karami, marking a stark division in Lebanon. A Maronite military rule in East Beirut opposed by a civilian government in West Beirut. On March 8, 1989, Aoun initiated a blockade against the illegal ports operated by Muslim militias, which sparked intense artillery conflicts that persisted for 6 months. Shortly after, he declared a war of liberation against Syrian forces and their allies among the Lebanese militias. Despite facing increased pressure from Syria, Aoun continued his fight for Lebanon's sovereignty, firmly criticizing Hafez al-Assad's regime. Although he enjoyed substantial support from Maronite circles, his leadership was met with skepticism from the Muslim community, who saw him as a divisive figure. Aoun's campaign aimed at liberating Lebanon from Syrian influence ultimately fell short, inflicting severe damage on East Beirut and leading to a significant Christian emigration. This period underlined not just the challenges of Lebanon's political landscape, but the deep-seated divisions within. In 1989, a pivotal moment arrived for Lebanon with the Taif Agreement, signaling the potential end to the ongoing conflicts. Earlier in January of that year, the Arab League took a proactive step by establishing a committee with Kuwait at the helm and Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and Morocco contributing. Their goal was clear: find a way to resolve the Lebanese crisis. This initiative led to a significant gathering in Taif, Saudi Arabia, where Lebanese lawmakers reached a consensus on a national reconciliation accord in October. A noteworthy outcome of this accord was the enhanced influence it granted to Syria in Lebanon's political scene. Following the agreement in Taif, the Lebanese parliamentarians returned home and on November 4th officially ratified the accord. The very next day, they took a vital step forward by electing René Mouawad as president. However, this decision faced immediate opposition from Michel Aoun, a key military figure in East Beirut, who outright rejected Mouawad's presidency and took a stand against the Taif Agreement. Tragically, President Mouawad's term was cut short just 17 days into his presidency when he was assassinated in a car bombing in Beirut on November 22nd. The attack occurred as he was returning from celebrations for Lebanese Independence Day. Following this tragedy, Elias Hraoui stepped into the role of president, where he served until 1998. Despite the change in leadership, Michel Aoun remained steadfast in his opposition, refusing to recognize Hraoui's presidency and going as far as dissolving parliament. On January 16, 1990, General Michel Aoun made a strong move by instructing all Lebanese media not to refer to Elias Hraoui and his colleagues in the Taif government as president or minister. This directive was a challenge to the Lebanese forces, a significant Christian militia led by Samir Geagea in East Beirut, which had developed into a formidable force. The Lebanese forces reacted by halting all their broadcast activities. This decision escalated the tension between Aoun and the Lebanese forces, as Aoun suspected the militia was considering an alliance with the Hraoui administration. On January 31, 1990, troops loyal to Aoun launched an assault on Lebanese forces' positions in East Beirut. Aoun had previously reasoned that it was essential for Lebanon's unity that all military groups, including the Lebanese forces, come under his command as the acting head of state. This conflict continued until March 8, when Aoun declared a ceasefire and called for talks. The battles brought a level of destruction and loss to East Beirut that hadn't been seen throughout the 15-year civil war, yet Aoun failed to make significant advances against Geagea's controlled territories. In August 1990, despite Aoun's disregard, the Lebanese parliament and the newly elected president moved forward with constitutional amendments that included several Taif Agreement political reforms. This overhaul resulted in a national assembly that for the first time equally represented Christians and Muslims, with a total of 128 seats. As Iraq's Saddam Hussein shifted his focus to Kuwait, the support Aoun was receiving from Iraq significantly reduced. The situation escalated on October 13, 1990, when Syria, in a major military operation that for the first time since the siege of Zal in 1981, included the use of its air force, alongside its allies including the Lebanese army under General Emil Lahoud, targeted Aoun's stronghold near the presidential palace, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of Aoun's supporters. This effectively eliminated Aoun's presence, solidifying Syria's control over Beirut. Following this defeat, Aoun sought refuge in the French embassy in Beirut, eventually leading to his exile in Paris. He wouldn't return to Lebanon until May 2005. Regarding the Syrian operation, William Harris notes it was contingent upon Syria's agreement with the United States. The deal was that in return for American support against Iraq in the Gulf War, Syria would ensure Israel did not target Syrian aircraft en route to Beirut. Reflecting on these events, Aoun accused the United States in 1990 of selling Lebanon to Syria, voicing his condemnation of the international and regional power plays at work. In March 1991, the government made a significant move by passing a law that forgave all political crimes committed before the law was put in place. However, this forgiveness did not cover crimes against foreign diplomats or crimes that the government decided to hand over to the Higher Judicial Council for review. Then, in May 1991, there was a big step towards peace when most militias were disbanded, except for Hezbollah. This moment marked the start of the Lebanese armed forces' journey to become the sole major non-sectarian force in Lebanon. Despite these efforts towards peace, violence hadn't completely stopped. A tragic example of this occurred in late December 1991 when a car bomb went off in the Basta, a predominantly Muslim neighborhood. The bomb, made of 220 pounds of TNT, caused a devastating explosion. At least 30 people lost their lives and around 120 were injured. Among those caught in the blast was former Prime Minister Shafiq Wazan, who luckily survived thanks to his bulletproof car. After the war, Syria's control over Lebanon was particularly tough on the Maronite community. Their leaders were either forced to leave the country, killed, or imprisoned. In 2005, the murder of Rafiq Hariri triggered the Cedar Revolution, which eventually led to the withdrawal of Syrian forces from Lebanon. Today's political groups in Lebanon are shaped by past civil war alliances and current global politics. The March 14th alliance includes parties mostly led by Maronites, like the Lebanese forces, Kataeb, National Liberal Party, National Bloc, and the Independence Movement, and Sunnis, such as the Future Movement and the Islamic Group. On the other hand, the March 8th alliance is mainly supported by Shia, Hezbollah, and Amal parties, but also includes a variety of Maronite and Sunni-led groups, along with the SSNP, Syrian Social Nationalist Party, Ba'athists, and Nasserists. Moreover, the ongoing Syrian civil war significantly influences Lebanon's political scene today. Since the war came to an end, people in Lebanon have gone to the polls for numerous elections. Many of the armed groups that once had a strong presence in the country have either lost their power or been completely broken up. The Lebanese Armed Forces, or LAF, have managed to spread the central government's influence over approximately two-thirds of the nation. After a ceasefire concluded the conflict between Israel and Lebanon on July 12, 2006, Lebanon's army took a significant step by moving into and taking control of the southern regions of the country for the first time in more than 30 years. It's estimated that about 150,000 people lost their lives, and an additional 100,000 were left with permanent disabilities. In the year 1989, the Associated Press reported a death toll of 150,000 over a period of 14.5 years, while Reuters reported a slightly lower figure of 140,000. These numbers, which break down to about 200 people killed every week for 14 years, are significantly higher than the official death count of 35,000 to 40,000. Furthermore, around 900,000 individuals, or one-fifth of the population before the war, were forced to leave their homes. It's believed that up to 250,000 people chose to emigrate and never return. In areas that were once battlegrounds, there are still thousands of landmines hidden underground. During the mid-1980s, some people from Western countries were kidnapped and were not released until June 1992. In Lebanon, the number of people who were abducted or went missing during the conflict reaches into the tens of thousands. Over the 15 years of conflict, there were more than 3,641 car bombings, causing 4,386 deaths and injuring thousands more. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.